Hello, I am Betsabeth Sastre Flores, commercial horticulturist from Virginia Copper Extension in Loudoun County, Virginia. In a healthy soil, where the roots and other living beings embrace silently, lies the secret of the health of the world. In this microcosm invisible to the naked eye, life itself resides. I follow the 4 principles of the soil because it is the biodiversity, sustainability, and prosperity of our planet.
Here we go with another episode of For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and Eric and Mary will be joining me in just a moment, but I wanted to remind everyone that when you listen to these podcasts, if we could ask you to like and subscribe to these podcasts, that greatly helps us on our end as we attempt to, quantify how many people are listening and what directions we should go with each and every episode. But like and subscribe to each of these podcasts as you listen to them. That would be greatly appreciated. And of course, the podcast is available on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, on Google Podcast. It's available in a lot of places, including the website forthesoil.org. That is the digit for thesoil.org. Now let's get to this week's podcast. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm Jeff Ishii, my co-host Eric Benfelt with Virginia Cooperative Extension Community Viability, and Mary Sketch Bryant with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Guys, I'm excited about our guest today. It's from outside Virginia, way outside Virginia. Mary, would you do the honors of introducing our special guest?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, really excited to have Kim Melton with us. Kim is the Soil Health Coordinator with the Red River Basin Commission, works as a collaborative across the Red River Basin of Minnesota, North Dakota, and Manitoba, Canada. So we think in Virginia we have different soil types here, but I know Kim is no stranger to working across different geographies. She grew up on a small farm in Minnesota and continues to raise her family close to home, has worked across the agricultural industry, background in beef cattle, from the dairy industry, managing grazing lands. So really excited, Kim, to talk with you today about your work in agriculture and soil health and with the Red River Basin Commission, which is doing some really interesting initiatives. So I guess we'll start with, would love to just hear a little bit about your background and how you came to the commission and why you landed there from other agricultural sectors.
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show and meet new folks throughout my career. So the last, I guess you gave a nice little introduction on my history and maybe what got me into conservation. But for the past 13 years, I've worked in conservation in Minnesota and on the North Dakota side. And so what has really been my passion growing up on a farm, what's kind of fueled me is working in agriculture and helping producers sustaining their operations or even growing it. I don't know if I like the word sustain so much as continue to evolve in the practices that we utilize to make sure that agriculture keeps moving forward and doesn't get stuck in the past. So a lot of what I have done is worked alongside farmers. Initially, the buffer law came to Minnesota, and that created a lot of heartburn throughout the state because now government is enforcing them to put buffers along waterways. And in our area, maybe it's a little hard to swallow. We're very flat here in the head of the Red River Valley. And so for us, our water doesn't typically run across. It goes where we direct it for the most part, unless you get some crazy rainfalls. But buffers were needed, especially for wildlife and to decrease the pollution that ends up in these streams. And we got this funding, and we made sure the buffers were done, and then we had some leftover money. And as I went along farmers' fields and checked these along their waterways, I found these blowouts. And so I ended up with like 65 of these great big blowouts along waterways, and farmers are actually farming around them. And being a local gal, I grew up here in Wilkin County, and so I would call these farmers and say, let me help you fix this, because you're driving around this. Some of them are like 2 vehicles deep, and it's creating a new headland in their field. And I said, we got some funding, and we can help you fix these big blowouts. And so then that turned into a positive effect with the buffer law. Like, hey, you know what? Instead of direct drainage of your soil running off in high volumes, we're going to put in a grade stable structure, and we're going to put in some grass here, and we're going to prevent all this erosion from continuing to happen. And now it's going to make your life a little easier to farm. And so that really got farmers into calling me as a resource and being that person they can count on to assist them with some issues. Well, then you get a little further down the line, and I really was pushing cover crops, and I cover crop was my passion coming from North Dakota, and we find a way to keep the soil on the land and not in our ditches. And so working with farmers to implement cover crops, we went from 400 acres the first year in our cover crop program, and I got a 5 farmer board that I work for Soil and Water, and these guys are like, we're farmers here, but cover crops don't belong here. We got thick clays. It doesn't dry out. I'm sorry, it doesn't work here. It might work out in southern Minnesota and eastern Minnesota and western North Dakota, but we have thick clay soil. It doesn't work here. And so we found some funding, and fast forward 4 years after 4 additional funding pots, those 5 board members are all signed up and utilizing cover crops, and we are now 14,000 acres of cover crops. And so for me, it was the awareness, it was the resource, it was a little bit of an incentive, and it was the big picture that really put it together for these local farmers to be able to implement BMPs. And then they just take it farther. And so having that resource and that funding as a package and giving them flexibility, not utilizing federal funding, gave us that ability to help write these mixes that were successful. So now I transitioned to the Basin Commission, and the Basin Commission is a huge swath of land, Lake Winnipeg to South Dakota, and we got Devil's Lake to Brainerd. And for those that don't understand it, that's a 3-state, two countries swath of land that we're looking at what the water is doing and how it is affecting everyone within this Basin Commission. So now I get to still work with farmers. I still got about 80 farmers I work with here in the valley at the head of the Red. And then as I head north, I work a lot with agencies and political divisions to make sure they understand the importance and the impact of soil health on agriculture to not just farmers, but everybody.
And Kim, you've provided us some context for where you are in the Red River. And for those people not familiar, can you tell us a little bit more about the cropping and farming systems that you're dealing with across the 3 states and the 2 countries and the 1 province?
Yeah, so here at it's south of Fargo-Moorhead, we're actually even along the Red River, there's a lot of sugar beets. So you got sugar beets in a corn soybean rotation. There are some edibles. Sunflowers are kind of taking a turn, and they're really more acres we've seen the last 2 years than we have in a long time for sunflowers. Wheat has pretty much died out unless you're a sugar beet guy and you're getting ready for your sugar beet season. There's not a lot of wheat. You don't see barley unless they're raising it as a little bit of a cover crop, a 20-acre patch. We do have potatoes as you head north. And so you're going to see a little bit more potatoes. And then as you get up into northern North Dakota, northern Minnesota, you got some more oats that come into play. You got flax, a little bit of canola, and now corn. Actually, like that is something, as a kid, you never seen corn on the northern end of North Dakota. And now genetics are allowing them to start planting corn up there.
We're talking today with Kim Melton. She is the Soil Health Coordinator for the Red River Basin Commission. And I believe you're in Fargo, North Dakota. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, but you cover a wide area. Matter of fact, I did a little research before our conversation, and I found a news article published in Canada by Pembina Valley Online. And you had a very interesting point in that article. You said that soil health is like a marriage of 2 perspectives. If you ask a soil scientist to define soil health, you'll get one answer. But if you ask a farmer to define soil health, you're probably going to get a completely different answer. Talk about that, if you will.
Yeah, in my career in the past 13 years, I've worked a lot with soil scientists. And when you're in that field with them, they're looking at the biology. They're looking for the fungi, the mycorrhiza fungi. They're looking for bacteria. They're looking for signs that show us this soil is alive. Dirt is dead, soil is alive. And so we're always digging in the dirt and we look at it from this whole different perspective. So many people walk across this earth, right? Whether you're on concrete or not, your still base is soil, right? And so we are covered in this soil that can be so productive, yet we beat the crap out of it and then still expect it to produce a crop or sustain us. And so I look at it, I work with a lot of farmers, right? And so that's when I work with soil scientists and I work along farmers and I see them as they look at yields, right? They look at like, all right, how much am I getting? How much grain am I hauling to the elevator? What can I talk about at the coffee shop? How good does my crop look? How green, how lush? That's how farmers are looking at it. They don't think about the soil health as a perspective of it's a living ecosystem that has to take that fertilizer that you put in the ground and it's got to transition it into plant available food. It's got to feed your roots. It's got to provide pore space, porosity, the organic matter, like what that system does for your crop. Most farmers aren't thinking about that. They're just thinking, I need a good seed bed prep. I got to get my fertilizer down. I got to pray for rain, right? They don't think about armoring their soil and maybe putting some trash on top and covering it so that we can handle whatever Mother Nature is throwing at us. So that is a part of my job is how do I help you armor your soil? How do we make sure you're ready for whatever's coming next?
Kim, you shared an awesome statistic earlier about just the increase that you've seen in cover crops in the region over multiple funding cycles, years. Are most of those farmers still, you know, is the incentive still present, financial incentive, or are you really seeing them starting to see that benefit on their land post-transition?
I love that you asked me that question because I got the same question last week when I was speaking for a group. And I am happy to say that when we started, we had a contract with General Mills and Cargill. It was $1.45 million for farmers, and it gave us the flexibility to create a program. And so as farmers came in and said, I want to try covers, but I want to try this, they weren't stuck to those guidelines of federal or state funding. So we were able to play and they were able to adopt their practices. But when that money came to us, they said, we would like you to complete a social survey. And so at the beginning of year one and at the end of year five, I sat down with each farmer and we surveyed them. And so of the farmers that completed the survey, there was 26 of them out of the 60 contracts. All of them said they would continue to utilize cover crops and reduce tillage after the incentive funds are gone. So I was super excited to know the impacts. I think once these guys realize the benefit, a lot of them see it in year one. Like we sit down multiple times a year and we talk about cover crop mix. We talk about how their year went in review, what we're looking forward to next year, what was our challenge, how are we going to overcome that? And so sitting down with them and hearing their confidence grow year after year, and now they're not scared of cover crops. Now they're not worried about that cereal rye taking over their field. They're not worried about not getting in the spring and planting. Is my soil going to warm up? Once you get past those hiccups, right? I mean, you got to get a good 5 years because every year is so different. One fall is going to be wet, one fall is going to be dry. Once you realize how it works and the benefits from it, you're going to keep doing it. And so I'm excited to report that these guys that I'm working with are continuing to create that awareness because it continues to grow here in the Valley, and cover crops, not a scary word anymore.
And Kim, you had mentioned some of your work about with soil health and the food value chain. If you could talk about the motivations of farmers, but then also some of the companies that you had mentioned, like King Arthur Baking, General Mills, Cargill, and Hershey, understanding their motivation as well.
Yeah, we have a $20 million RCPP right now throughout the state of North Dakota, and then it includes the 6 counties, the area that I was working in previously. And so what we did was we brought in incentive funding to help these farmers try new practices. the big change, it goes through a lot of agronomists. It doesn't go through conservation districts on the North Dakota side. So that was the big change and the push. But we have 12, I believe. That's the King Arthur, that's the Hershey's, PepsiCo, General Mills, Cargill, Walmart Foundation. That is where there's like a huge kick of funding that came in to help us get match for that $20 million. I believe it was like 11. Don't quote me how much match money came in. I think it was around 11 million. But these companies are now understanding that they can impact agriculture. Impact agriculture as in, I'm going to give you some funding, and I'm not always going to expect a return that's not the inset, but the offset. So these companies are also realizing that they maybe have that carbon footprint that they need to decrease. So some of them definitely have the inset value, but a lot of them, like General Mills, just have a goal like, how do we impact agriculture in a positive way? So they're not here looking for anything more than a result of how many acres of agriculture can we assist change for the better, because they also realize like they need agriculture. These industries, they need wheat production, they need oat production, they need sugar, they need sunflowers, they need oil. And so they also understand like, how can we assist in a way that benefits not just us, but everybody as a whole.
Once again, we're talking with Kim Melton. She is Soil Health Coordinator for the Red River Basin Commission, and unfortunately our time is up for this episode, Kim, but I hope that you can stick around with us and record a second episode. I know I've got a lot of questions, and I suspect Mary and Eric do also. So can you stay with us?
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it, Jeff.
Very well, very well. Kim Melton, Soil Health Coordinator with the Red River Basin Commission. That's going to do it for this episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. Eric and Mary will catch you in the next one.
Thank you, Jeff and Kim.
Thank you.
For the Soil, a Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, just contact your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a Conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.